Welcome to GGG Insights, connecting you with issues that affect the town of East Hampton and its residents. This is part 2 of a small series we have with Alex Walter, the Executive Assistant to the Town Supervisor, Larry Cantwell. In our first segment, we discussed the relationship that Alex and Larry had built up in administering the town, and I think it's fair to say a view that the next town supervisor probably shouldn't try to do this all himself. Is that a fair statement?
Oh yeah, for sure. You can't really do the job effectively and serve the public and all the interests without help.
Yep. And I think one of the things that Larry mentioned, which I think is very important, is that he hopes in his last town budget, the budget for 2018, to have a line item for town administrator, town executive assistant, whatever you want to call it, but a position that hopefully the next town board could fill with a person with important credentials, especially, I think you said, Alex, an accounting background, a financial background, human resources abilities, and administrative abilities. Operations. Let's take a few minutes now. You mentioned, by the way, you also mentioned that you're building a new town hall building. Could you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, there was a broken old building in the back. Is that the one you're going to rebuild, or?
Yeah, the plan, I think, and maybe not everybody knows, but to be the most efficient that we could be, it'd be good to have all town employees on one campus. You know, other than obviously the highway department and who's out working, but all the administrative offices, all the offices where the public comes on a regular basis. If we could get all those departments together in one building, so to speak, we then, improve the coordination between departments, because there's many departments that, kind of depend on each other, that have common things. The building department, the zoning and planning boards, the fire marshal, code enforcement. These departments need to work together, and not only in dealing with the public on an everyday basis, but to talk about things that are common to the problems in each one of the departments.
They're not in one place now.
They're not in one place now. We have a lot of them over at 300 Panago Place.
That's the big condominium project?
Yeah.
The town has a few.
Correct. We have about 11,000 square feet over there.
Okay,
we have offices on Bluff Road. So to get them into a one building, one area where the interaction can be even greater is something that we thought about. But how to do it? How are we going to do it? What kind of building are we going to design that'll make that interaction easier to accomplish? And we struggled with that for a while, quite frankly. We started out with a space needs analysis committee where we took all our people, how much space are they in now? If we're going to build a new building, we have to know how much room we need for various employees and the equipment that's involved in every department. So we went through the process of hiring an engineer through an RFP process, and we spent too much time, I believe, with not some forward thinking as far as how we should develop this building. And it happened, we were kind of spinning our wheels, and then one snowy morning when town hall was closed and Larry and I were the only two in there, and Drew Bennett, who was a member of the committee, walked in that morning about something else, and we were just discussing things, and all of a sudden we started talking about that, and between the three of us, I think Drew opened our eyes a little bit, came up with an idea of an open space area where we can have some interaction, one place where the public could go, have interaction between the departments, and thought that would be the best way to go about things. But we also were struggling with what the building should look like. And Larry came up with the idea that, hey, why don't we have to kind of complement but not replicate what's already there, a barn look to it, And then one of the architects that's on the committee came up with a 3-barn configuration that are connected with an open area. And we've kind of all agreed
That's it.
that we kind of, yeah, this is it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that we're in the process now of having the engineer and architect put together the specs.
How many
so we
usable
can get
square,
it out there.
I'm sorry, how many usable square feet will this building have, Lou?
About 18,000 square feet.
you said you have
and
11?
then a downstairs.
You can't, yeah, they don't, the two numbers don't equate, because the 11 to 12,000 square feet of existing space at 300 Panago doesn't include the hallways,
Sure.
the outside
Well,
bathroom.
bathrooms, everything else, yeah.
When we say 17 or 18,000,
You lose about
it's
10%,
not,
20%?
it's not apples,
Okay.
it's not exactly
But
apples.
there's more to it than that, in that there's a couple of more departments than are just over in
No, you
Panago
mentioned
Place.
on Buffalo
We're gonna,
Road.
the idea is to move the clerk's office to the more open, modern place, where it's easier for the public to get to. Like right now, where our clerk's office is, the parking lot's quite a bit
Oh, yeah.
away from that. So
On a rainy day,
we
that
get-
makes a difference.
Very difficult for the elderly.
we get
and
elderly or
handicapped
handicapped
to get to.
people that it's a real trek to get from our parking lot over
Well,
to
especially if you go to the clerk's office and you find you're at the wrong office.
Right.
So you got to go to another office.
Well,
You gotta,
and you bring up a good point. I mean, we have people, during tax season coming to town hall, the administrative buildings to pay their taxes, and then, they come in, they don't know where to go,
and you
and
tell them to go
we
to-
have to send them over to Panago, and
and the first question is,
yeah.
where's Panago?
this is really about serving the public, and being efficient.
Larry, let me ask you a question. You picked the number, I think it was 18,000. As time goes on, it's very probable the town workforce will get bigger, especially as the town gets bigger, it
I
gets
mean,
more
you
complex.
could debate that.
Yeah, my
with
question is,
technology.
yeah, well, you could. It might go the other way around.
Right.
The robot gives out the
Yeah.
parking sticker. But is this building going to be built in such a way that you could add another piece later?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And then you also mentioned,
Took that into consideration.
yeah, you also mentioned the basement. I know Bonnie Krupinski sits on one of our committees, and she's always talking about building the basement, and so does Pat Trunzo, who's on that same committee.
Well, basements
cheap
have,
space.
basements have some utility, but they don't necessarily solve, they're not as, you can't utilize them in the same way you can.
No, of course not,
First
yeah.
floor space, but this would include basement space
Oh, okay,
as
good.
well. Yeah. I mean, the concept here, look, the problem that, I've seen this, 42 years of experience in government and politics is, every time government talks about spending money sort of on itself, if you will, I mean, building a building for, town hall, it's easy to criticize it. Why don't you spend that money on something else, or, why are you spending that money? But in this case, we're talking about taking existing town-owned building space, 11 to 12,000 square feet of office space, and that asset would be sold. That's valuable
frame,
office
yeah.
space that would be vacated by us and then sold to help offset, some substantial portion of the cost of the new construction.
Now, I ran into Alex a couple of days ago, and he said, what are we going to talk about? And I sort of, dodged and wove back and forth. But basically, I've got 3 questions for you. And the 3 questions are, what are the projects that you've done that you feel most proud of in the last couple of years? Which 1 or 2 or 3 that you'd rather you had never started? And what do you see as a couple of big areas which need a lot of work going forward?
I would say the things that I'm most proud of is, establishing a working environment on the town board where board members work together, interact with the public in a very civil and dignified way, trying to solve problems together. I'm very proud of building that relationship with the community and with the board members. You've got to have a positive, productive environment in order to solve some of the serious problems that we face. And I think as a result of that working relationship, we were able to take on some very significant, important issues. I mean, when the problems occurred in Montauk, for example, we worked together, along with department heads, the police department, code enforcement, and many others, and took command of a very troubling situation down there. That the community was reacting to in a very strong way.
Well, Larry, apropos of that, I guess one of the things that's in the news right now is that Governor Cuomo sees the opportunity to get 4% non-real estate tax revenue into the budget, and is going to have, if he gets what he wants, the state supersede all the municipalities with respect to Uber, and so that the steps you've taken to bring Uber into compliance, if you will, with the way the people in Montauk want their town to be, maybe by the wayside. How are you going to deal with that?
I think first of all, the issues with respect to cabs and Uber, in the Montauk area is only one aspect of a larger problem.
Oh, no. People have said that there's been a dramatic change in Montauk. There's no question about that.
But with respect to Uber, the things that the town has done, the law changes it made in licensing to require, fingerprinting and background checks for every driver, setting up a system where their vehicles are inspected by the code enforcement when they're issued their permit and their stickers, and setting out some basic rules and regulations, Uber did not want to really work with. Right. So this was never about whether Uber should or shouldn't be in East Hampton. The problem that we had was that 3 years ago, Uber drivers from all over the metropolitan area descended upon the hamlet of Montauk
on Saturday night.
On the weekends, trying to pick up an extra buck because things are pretty quiet in Manhattan, in the summer.
They're all out in Montauk.
In Montauk, and it created a lot of public safety issues for us. I mean, the Uber drivers were, sleeping in their cars, because they were there for the weekend, so they weren't working. They'd go down to Montauk Point or down to the docks or in a public parking lot, and they were sleeping in those vehicles. I mean, it created a lot of congestion, vehicle congestion, and Uber drivers were essentially not acting as, crowdsource or, demand drivers, where you go on their app and call them to pick you up. They were queuing up with the cabs and getting in line in front of the clubs and creating a mess. And the things that we did to try to get that under control, I thought were very positive. Now, I take issue with what the governor is proposing to do because he's leaving our hands tied.
Right, that's what
we wrote him a very thoughtful letter that was 2.5 pages long that laid out a year ago when they were first considering statewide legislation so that Uber-type businesses
we're talking about the other ones too,
would go to the state of New York and get licensed as opposed to getting a local license. And they didn't respond. He didn't respond to concerns we raised, and we even suggested some solutions that if he was going to pursue this so that they were able to get a statewide license as opposed to cabs who still have to run around getting all the local licenses, that he ought to put in some controls that would help us deal with some of the issues that we were having, and we got no response. So I'm really disappointed in the governor's response to problems that we're
lack
having.
of response.
Lack of response to our community. So, we're going to have to deal with that. I mean, the burden, again, is going to fall on us. We're going to get the complaints when the congestion comes. And, we don't have a copy of the law that's apparently going to be adopted here. A deal's been made in Albany. But when we get it, we're going to go over it real carefully. And if we can legislate other ways of protecting public safety in Montauk, we're going to, we'll do it.
Alex, you mentioned before Montauk and the textile.
The geotextile bags?
Yeah, right. I was trying to get the word.
Right.
You lived with it, so you know the word backwards. It probably is part of your nightmare scenario.
Well, there's been times, it's been.
A lot of people, by the way, a lot of people use the words bait and switch in that context. I think that was part of the problem here.
Right. That's hard to react to as far as that's concerned. You have to understand that the downtown Montauk Beach Stabilization Project is a precursor to the larger FIM plan, the Fire Island to Montauk Point reformulation plan, which is a much bigger project than a 3,100 foot project of bags
Now, is this
as a temporary solution to get us to the bigger project. So in retrospect, the project went well as originally constructed. We did a lot of work to get to the point of the construction starting and been completed, and it was completed in May of last year.
It's pretty much on schedule.
Yeah,
as these
it was, and
projects
there was
go,
a
yeah.
couple of things that weren't done yet, and we weren't going to accept the project till everything was done. And then they had some problems with the weather, and I think what we've realized that I don't want to say it was a bad design engineering wise, but I'm not sure that there was any short-term solution to this problem of erosion in that area. Certainly, the FIM project is going to be a much better solution, but it may not be the final solution.
Well,
and I think the board's going to have to grapple with what really needs to be done down there, because Mother Nature
doesn't cooperate.
Yeah, it doesn't cooperate, and what do you do with the hotels that are down there? And the question is, and we've got a committee that's looking at things. Is that the Coastal Resiliency Committee? What do we do down there? Do we relocate the motels? Do you buy the motels out? Because eventually, they're not going to be there anymore.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the FIM. I guess it's Fire Island to
To
Montauk.
Montauk Point, so it's
Now,
FIM.
how long has that been in the works, and will I be alive to see it done?
Well, actually,
you
actually
sure
you will. I mean, look,
Phew.
no, look, it's a 40-year, I mean, it's been a 40-year process that the Corps is going through. The good news is, at this point, Congress funded
I didn't realize it was funded.
the implementation of the plan. The Corps has completed their draft plan. We had hearings in East Hampton regarding their proposal and made a number of recommendations to the Corps. They're going to finish their review process over the next year or year and a half, adopt the final plan, and then begin to spend the money. It's almost $1 billion of funds that have been approved by Congress for this plan. And let me just say this about downtown Montauk. Downtown Montauk is a failure in part because the Army Corps of Engineers made a bad decision to do half the project instead of instead of the complete project. And we were angry with them when they made that call over 2 years ago, and we told them, frankly, that this project had little chance of succeeding unless they built the complete project. And the complete project was the rebuilt dune with about 100-foot beach in front of it. It was a major, it would have involved bringing an offshore dredge, pumping natural sand, widening the beach in front of the dune that they built, and lengthening it. And that would have provided, as Alex said, that's not a permanent solution, but that solution had a chance of succeeding at least for, an interim number of years until we can find a more permanent solution, which is, look, we can't, as Alex said, I mean, at some point you can't fight Mother Nature, and we need to really plan for, logically figuring out how the most vulnerable properties on the ocean should be removed, and that's going to probably involve compensation and payout, and properties have values,
Well, Larry,
and then relocating them.
I was just
to an
going to say about
appropriate-
relocating.
You
because-
can't. Well, you can't. There's probably there's about a dozen or more properties that are in the critical area there, and some of those are motel units. The motel units are valuable to the economy of Montauk, and they probably need to be rebuilt in another location that's safer. Now, there's also some single-family homes. There's some condominiums, 2 or 3 unit condominiums, smaller, properties that are developed there that wouldn't have to be necessarily.
Are you talking about somewhere between 500 and 1,000 motel rooms? Is that the?
No, I'm sorry. I think the number of motel rooms in that stretch of beach is about 500. That's my understanding.
Okay, so that 500 family comes out. That's really three or four people. So you're talking about 1,000, 1,500 people a weekend who, if you didn't have those rooms available, not necessarily there, but someplace else, that would have
a negative
effect on the economy.
You know,
Right, sure.
I mean, a lot of businesses, you know, make their living off of, you know, visitors in Montauk especially. So there's a lot, you know, there's the economics of all that. There's the environment that we're trying to deal with. There's the changes to the environment we're trying to deal with. And, you know, really long-term, we need a really solid plan for, I think, eventually replacing that development,
Reciting it someplace else.
restoring the primary dune that was there originally. You have to remember what happened down there, you know, many, many years ago, before there was good, you know, land use planning and environmental rules and regulations. You know, what happened there was the primary, you know, developers were allowed to go in there 40, 50, whenever it was, 30, 40, 50 years, 40, 50 years ago at least, and literally tear down the primary dune. They went in and bulldozed
Sure, you wanted the
the
ocean
primary
access.
dune, and they built, you know, a motel, you know, a motel development there. I mean, something like that, obviously, you know, wouldn't happen today, given the rules that we have. But that's the legacy of what happened there, and that primary dune really probably needs to be replaced.
Now, what is this FIM or the Fire Island? What is this?
Montauk Point Plan.
Yeah, what does that have? What is the Corps of Engineers now considering for that area of Montauk?
Well, what they're considering is, you know,
Is it rebuilding this primary dune that you're talking about
no,
on the beach expansion?
No, what they're proposing or considering proposing is a beach replenishment project that would not replace the motels, wouldn't move the motels back. What it would do is employ an offshore dredge and
pump sand up?
pump, you know, 700 to 1 million cubic yards of sand from offshore onto the beach in front of the you know, on the ocean side of the primary dune. Essentially build it out, if you will.
Isn't that what you wanted originally? You wanted
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. So
Yeah.
now they're going to do what you had suggested
Yeah.
to do originally, except now you have this interim step.
Yeah, the problem is that, you know, look, you have to look at what happened. They built what's there today. You know, in 3 months later, we had, you know, a storm event, Hermine, which wasn't a hurricane, and turned out to be 40 to 50 mile an hour nor'easter, which is not untypical out here.
Right.
You know, severe damage to that project that they built. They rebuilt it, you know, and then in January, we had, you know, another fairly typical strong nor'easter. Guess what? More damage to it. And the Corps is coming back now in April this month, and they're going to rebuild it again. So, you know, you have to have your head, you know, excuse the expression, stuck in the sand to realize this isn't going to work. This is not a permanent solution here. And we really need to think about what that is.
Well, we never would have agreed to this plan without the bigger plan coming on on the heels of this plan. And quite frankly, we would have put ourselves in a tough position with the Army Corps if we said, no, you're not doing this. We just, you know, so when FIMP did come along, they say, hey.
You didn't cooperate last time, and you're going to get the short end of the
would have
stick
put
this
us
time.
in a tough position.
So we have one and one here. We have one, you know, positive accomplishment and one that we're, you know, are very concerned about. We haven't gotten to 3 of 3 yet.
Oh, okay, let's ask 3 of 3. What are a couple of the really big issues that you see the town needing to come to grips with over the next 2 or 3, next 5 to 10 years?
So I think
it has to start right now if it's going to be.
Well, I think, in my opinion, one of the biggest, and I'm going to let the supervisor talk about it, but I think water quality. And that's something, as people know, that we had a referendum last fall that passed significantly to be able to use 20% of the Community Preservation Fund for water quality. And I think it's something that the supervisor feels very strongly about and wants to get some legislation in effect, and we've done a lot of work on it so far before the end of his term. And I'll let Larry.
Larry, one of the questions I would have initially when you say we've got a big problem and it's going to, you know, somewhat technically oriented, do you envision hiring a couple of new engineers on the town's payroll? Or, again, maybe you don't even have this choice because you may not be here long enough, but certainly the 2018 budget, which you will prepare, would that have a new engineer, a hydraulic, not a guy to go out,
Well,
dig
okay.
holes, but
We're
a
probably going to need,
supervising.
we'll probably need a sanitary engineer as part of that program to carry out the community preservation fund,
Right.
water quality improvement program. But look, there are 19,000 septic or cesspool systems throughout the town of East Hampton. Of the total of 19, almost 12,000 are only cesspools.
Oh,
Cesspools,
I didn't realize it was that big a number.
yeah, I mean, over half of them are only cesspools. Cesspools were banned as a sanitary system 40 years ago.
Larry, this is a 5 to 10 year project, and you've got 84 seconds.
Well, we're not going to.
So we're not going to solve this one.
No, but
I think you're giving us an idea of
I
the
think what
magnitude of
everybody
this
needs
thing.
to know is that the sanitary systems that we have in place throughout the town today, especially in environmental critical areas, are a principal cause of pollution of potentially the groundwater and the groundwater and surface waters. And it's something as a community we need to deal with.
So that's one. What about transportation, affordable housing, all that kind of stuff? Is that?
They're all important, and we've made some progress in some of those areas, hoping to get a shuttle train started, working with the railroad, Assemblyman Thiel and others that will move people on the South Fork through a shuttle train system.
Has there been any real hope in your mind of that happening in the next 4 to 5 years?
Absolutely, yes.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's not going to happen this year.
No.
But I think we have a commitment from the railroad and from the state to begin a shuttle train service on the South Fork beginning in the summer of 2018.
Oh, that's terrific. I mean, I don't think, at least I never realized it was that imminent. That's going to make a dramatic difference to my personal drive out here.
Well, I think it's going to help over time. And it won't change things overnight, but I think over time, moving people by train, especially workers and employees and others, could be a big help.
Plus, we're working on moving
Alex,
those people around.
we've got to cut you off.
Well,
We've
that's
run
okay.
over our time. I had 10 questions down here. We're on 2.
Okay.
And I thank you both for being with us again.
My pleasure.
Good to be with you, Arthur.
Thanks. And thank you all for joining us, and hope to have you next time.